You really thought you could just walk in here. Brandon Mercer stepped into Christopher's space in the crowded locker room and tipped his protein shake over the older man's shoulder, watching it soak through the cheap gray sweatshirt. Christopher didn't move. You disrespected me in my gym. Brandon shoved him backward hard into the row of metal lockers. The hollow clang of Christopher's back hitting cold steel split the room. 14 people heard it. Nobody moved. Christopher straightened. He did not raise his hands. He looked at Brandon with the kind of stillness that has nothing to prove. What are you going to do about it, old man? Christopher looked at the Wi-Fi router on the wall. He looked back at Brandon. Already did it, he said. Brandon laughed. He grabbed Christopher's collar and ripped it back to expose the tattoo. Across the room, Coach looked up, and the color drained out of his face. The air in the windowless basement server room was thick with sweat.
Wrong move. He thought silence meant weakness. Let me take you back.
It carried the metallic tang of impending violence. Brandon adjusted his grip on the heavy steel lifting bar. A cruel, arrogant smirk twisted his features as his 3 enforcers cornered the older man against the humming server racks. Christopher stood perfectly still in his torn gray sweatpants. His breathing was eerily calm. He stared down the weapons raised against him. You really thought, Brandon spat, stepping into striking distance, you could just walk into my gym and disrespect me. Before the steel bar could swing, the heavy metal door crashed open. Coach stood in the frame, his face drained of all color. His eyes locked onto the exposed ink on Christopher's back. Drop it! He screamed, voice cracking with pure terror. Brandon didn't know what the older man held in his hand. The locker room at Iron Apex Gym smelled of rubber sweat and something sharper beneath both. It smelled of hierarchy. The morning crowd was thick, loud, and entirely unaware. Christopher moved through it the way he moved through everything, quietly, deliberately, without friction. He wore faded gray sweatpants, soft at the knees, frayed at the hems. His sweatshirt was old, cheap, and clean. His gym bag slung low over one shoulder was held together in 2 places by duct tape. He found an open locker near the far wall. He set his bag down. He began to change. Brandon entered the locker room the way thunder enters a room before lightning does. His crew came first. 3 of them wide-shouldered, loud, filming everything with their phones. Brandon himself wore $500 worth of custom MMA gear fitted matte black with embroidered initials on the chest. His diamond chains caught the overhead light. His smartphone buzzed loud and continuous with notifications Christopher couldn't read from a distance. Brandon moved through the room like a man who had never once considered that space belonged to anyone but him. The collision, when it came, was not an accident. Brandon stepped left. Christopher stepped right. The shoulder check was precise, controlled, and deliberate. The protein shake in Brandon's hand tilted first. It landed on Christopher's shoulder. The thick, sticky liquid spread across the old gray fabric in a slow, irreversible stain. The shake was expensive. The brand was printed on the bottle in raised, embossed lettering. The sweatshirt it ruined cost less than the bottle. Christopher went still, not frozen, still. His hands lowered to his sides. His eyes moved once to the stain, then back to Brandon's face. He said nothing. Brandon laughed. It was a short, contemptuous sound designed to carry. His crew lifted their phones higher. One of them shifted left, angling for a better frame. Brandon's eyes dropped to Christopher's shoulder where the wet fabric had pulled back slightly at the collar. He saw the edge of it, a tattoo. Faded dark, precise in its lines. An anchor crossed with a trident. Brandon's expression shifted. The smirk widened. He tilted his head. "The hell is that?" he said. He looked back at his crew. They lowered their phones, slightly uncertain. He looked back at Christopher. "You buy that off the internet stolen valor, old man. Fake street trash." He shoved Christopher, both palms open flat against the chest. Christopher's back struck the row of lockers behind him. The sound was immediate, hollow, and sharp. A metallic clang that cut through the ambient noise of the room and hung there for a half-second before the crowd noise swallowed it. Joshua, the morning janitor, stood at the far end of the row with a mop in his hands. He did not move. He did not look away. Christopher absorbed the impact without stepping forward. His shoulders did not rise. His jaw did not tighten. He breathed in through his nose, slow and deliberate, held it for 4 counts, and breathed out. The technique was not passive. It was not submission. It was a calculation so practiced it had become reflex, the kind of reflex built not in a gym but in environments where losing control meant losing everything. His eyes stayed on Brandon's face the entire time, flat, steady, recording. Brandon waited for a reaction. He did not get one. That absence bothered him in a way he would not have been able to name. He filled it with volume. "Film this," he said to his crew. He reached forward and gripped the collar of Christopher's sweatshirt. He pulled it down and to the side, exposing the full tattoo on the upper back and shoulder. The anchor, the trident. And beneath them, faint but precise, a jagged sunburst pattern that wrapped the design at its base. Fake ink, fake soldier. You come in here looking like that, smelling like that. He released the collar. He stepped back. He smiled at the camera. "Get out of my gym." The crew laughed. The phone stayed up. Joshua pressed himself against the wall at the end of the row. Christopher straightened the collar of his sweatshirt. He reached into his gym bag with his left hand. He removed a small towel and pressed it briefly to the wet patch on his shoulder. With his right hand still inside the bag, his fingers moved once across the surface of a black micro USB drive, no larger than a thumbnail. He did not remove it. He did not look at it. He already knew it was there. He closed the bag. He looked up. His eyes moved not to Brandon, but to the corner of the room near the ceiling. A router, a small blinking light, a standard commercial model, the kind that broadcasts its default IP address to any device within 30 feet. He noted the number. He moved on to the second router visible above the mirror line at the far wall. He noted that one, too. His face gave nothing away. His breathing remained even, unhurried, and exactly 4 counts long. Brandon was already walking away. He was already laughing. His crew followed, phones still raised. The footage would be edited and posted within the hour. It would show a quiet old man in cheap clothes absorbing a shove and saying nothing. It would look exactly like what Brandon intended it to look like. It would look like weakness. Brandon didn't notice the quiet man in the faded sweatshirt had just cataloged every security blind spot in the room. The supply closet was at the end of the service corridor behind the door, with the broken handle that nobody had fixed in 8 months. Christopher found it on the first try. He did not ask for directions. He had already mapped the corridor layout from the position of the ventilation ducts visible above the gym floor, cross-referenced against the router placement he had logged 20 minutes earlier in the locker room. The door opened inward. He pushed it gently and stepped inside. Joshua was already there. The janitor had his back to the door, sorting chemical bottles on the lower shelf, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned to make themselves small in spaces where large men operated. He was 19, maybe 20. His uniform was the same pale green as the walls. He heard the door and turned. His eyes went wide. He took 1 step back into the shelf. A bottle of industrial bleach rocked but did not fall. The smell of it was immediate, heavy, and suffocating in the cramped, humid air of the closet. It coated the back of the throat. It left no room for anything else. Christopher held up one open hand. He stepped in and let the door close behind him. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. His voice was low even and unhurried. "I saw you in the locker room. You watched the whole thing." Joshua said nothing. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved once to the door, calculating distance. Christopher did not move closer. He stayed near the entrance and let the silence settle until it was no longer alarming, just present. "I need 2 things," Christopher said. "The gym's master Wi-Fi password and access to the AV broadcast mainframe." He paused. "That's it." Joshua exhaled through his nose. He looked at the floor. His mop handle was leaning against the wall to his left, and his hand moved toward it without quite touching it, a reflex rather than a threat. "You know who that guy is," he said. "You know what he does to people who cross him." "I do," Christopher said. "He owns half the trainers here. He pays the front desk. He pays the IT guys." Joshua looked up. His voice had dropped lower. "Last month, someone left a note on the manager's desk about the stuff Brandon brings in through the back entrance. The guy who wrote it doesn't work here anymore. Nobody fired him. He just stopped showing up. Christopher listened. He did not rush the young man. He did not offer reassurance he couldn't guarantee. He waited, and his eyes were steady, and there was something in that steadiness that was not comfort exactly, but was something adjacent to it. Certainty. The particular, undramatic certainty of a man who had already decided how this ended and was simply executing steps. Joshua looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the analog watch on Christopher's wrist. It was battered, its face scratched, its band replaced so many times the original color was gone. It was not a smart device. It had no network connection, no display notifications, no ambient glow. It simply told time cleanly and without apology. Joshua's eyes moved briefly to his own phone in his shirt pocket, where a notification banner was visible even through the fabric. Brandon's name. A message, probably an order. "The password is Iron Apex 2019, Joshua said quietly. "All caps on the INA. The mainframe access is through the server room in the basement. Port on the left side of the primary rack. It's a standard input." He stopped. He looked away. "The system auto-wipes every Friday at 5. Cleans the broadcast buffer, the intake logs, everything. It's a security protocol the old owner set up. Brandon kept it because it deletes the week's camera footage automatically." He paused. "Today is Friday." Christopher looked at his watch. It was 11:47 in the morning. He did not react to the deadline. He noted it the way he had noted the router addresses and the corridor layout as a variable to be managed rather than a threat to be feared. "Thank you," he said. He reached into the front pocket of his gym bag. He removed the black micro USB drive. It was small, unremarkable flat matte plastic with no brand marking. He held it for a moment, not displaying it, simply confirming its presence the way a surgeon confirms an instrument before a procedure. Then he zipped the pocket closed. "There's one more thing," Joshua said. His voice had changed. It was quieter now, and there was something beneath the fear that had not been there at the start of the conversation. Not courage, exactly. Something more like the exhaustion of carrying a weight that had become too specific to keep setting down. The trainers he bribes. He keeps the records on his phone, the routing numbers for where the money comes from, the drop schedules, all of it. He's not careful about it. He thinks being loud is the same as being protected. He hesitated. "I've seen the screen. I wasn't trying to. He just doesn't care who's in the room when he talks." Christopher looked at the young man for a moment. He said nothing. He nodded once, a small, clean acknowledgement. Then he turned open the supply closet door and stepped back into the service corridor. The bleach smell followed him for 3 steps, then the recycled gym air replaced it. He moved toward the basement stairwell at a pace that would not register as urgent to anyone watching the security feeds. His left hand hung loose at his side. His right hand was in his bag pocket, already wrapped around the drive. He passed the main gym floor without looking at it. Somewhere above the weight floor, Brandon's smartphone was lighting up with another offshore banking alert, bright, sleek, and entirely visible to anyone standing within arm's reach. Christopher's analog watch read 11:51. The digital trap was primed, but a ghost knows that technology is only as reliable as the shadows hiding it. Brandon found the IT office at 1:15 in the afternoon. He did not knock. The door swung open ahead of him, and he walked through it the way he walked through every threshold in the building, as if the space had been constructed specifically to receive him. His crew stayed outside in the corridor. He closed the door himself. That detail mattered. It meant he did not consider the man inside a witness worth managing. The IT technician was young, pale, and already standing by the time Brandon reached the desk. His name was printed on a laminated badge clipped to his collar. His chair was still rolling backward from when he had pushed up from it. He was the kind of man who had learned early that standing when Brandon entered was simply faster than the alternative. Brandon set his phone on the desk face up. The screen was active. On it, a single file name was visible, a timestamp from the morning's locker room footage. He looked at the technician. He said nothing. He reached into the front pocket of his training shorts and removed a folded stack of $100 bills. He set it on the desk beside the phone. He did not count it out. He did not explain it. He simply placed it there and looked at the technician the way a man looks at a vending machine after pressing a button. The technician looked at the money, he looked at the phone, he sat back down. "The whole morning block?" he asked. "Everything from 6 to noon," Brandon said. "Locker room feeds, main floor corridor outside the locker room, all of it." The technician's fingers moved over his keyboard. He did not ask why. He did not make eye contact again. The deletion took 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Brandon stood with his arms crossed and watched the progress bar without expression. When it finished, the technician minimized the window and turned back toward his secondary monitor, a clear and practiced signal that the transaction was complete and he would not be recalling it. Brandon picked up his phone. He left the money on the desk. He walked back out into the corridor. His crew fell in around him as he moved toward the parking lot exit. The afternoon sun came through the glass doors at the far end of the corridor in a flat, bright rectangle. Brandon pushed through them without slowing. His custom sports car was parked directly in front of the entrance in a space marked clearly for disabled use. Its engine turned over with a roar that compressed the air in the immediate area, a loud, obnoxious, vibrating sound that rolled across the parking lot and briefly drowned out everything else within 30 feet. The ambient street noise, the conversations near the entrance, the quiet murmur of 2 trainers talking beside a side door 20 meters away. Brandon leaned against the hood. His crew arranged themselves in a loose half circle. He was in a good mood. The deletion had been clean. The morning was already gone. He spoke at full volume the way he always did when he was confident, which was always. "Shipment comes in Tuesday," he said. He looked at the largest of the 3, a man with a neck tattoo and a compressed, watchful face. "Same entrance as last time. Tell Reyes to have the back office cleared by 8. He scrolled through his phone with his thumb as he spoke. "The new batch is stronger. We're pricing it at a 40% markup. Anyone who complains goes to the wait list." He laughed. It was a short, self-satisfied sound. "Supply and demand, gentlemen." One of the crew said something. Brandon laughed again. He looked up from his phone. "You see that TV system they've got in there?" He nodded back toward the building. "The screen's on the main floor. Old system hardwired analog input routing. Every screen in the building connects to the same physical line." He shook his head with the particular contempt of a man who considered infrastructure a reflection of personal worth. "Archaic. I keep telling Coach to let me fund an upgrade. He won't touch it." He looked at his phone again. "Doesn't matter. Nobody's using it for anything except fight replays." He pushed off the hood. He straightened his chains. He got in the car. The engine sound expanded as he reversed, then compressed again as he pulled forward and cleared the lot. Within 30 seconds, the noise was gone. The 2 trainers near the side door went back to their conversation. The corridor beyond the glass doors returned to its ordinary rhythm. In the shadow of the stairwell entrance at the far end of the parking lot, partially behind the metal frame of a propped fire door, Christopher stood. He had been there for 11 minutes. He had heard the shipment details, the pricing structure, the name Reyes, and the reference to the back office. He had heard the description of the building's television system, hardwired analog routing every screen on a single physical line delivered by Brandon himself, with the casual precision of a man who had no idea he was building someone else's case. He had heard all of it. He had not moved. He had not recorded it on a device. He did not need to. His memory was not the kind that required backup. He looked at his watch. It was 1:47 in the afternoon. The server room was still accessible. The mainframe port Joshua had described was still open. The USB drive was still in his pocket. And somewhere in the building behind him, the IT technician was sitting in front of a screen that no longer held any footage of what had happened that morning in the locker room. They thought erasing the footage had erased his voice. They had no idea that silence used correctly was the only weapon that left no trace on the way in and total ruin on the way out. Christopher let the fire door close behind him. He moved back into the building. He did not hurry. He never hurried. Hurrying was for people who were not already 3 steps ahead.
Wait, he literally bought off the staff to erase his own assault footage. If that were me, I would have called the police immediately. Imagine standing in the parking lot, watching the guy who attacked you buy his way out of trouble while bragging about his crimes. The audacity is real.
The basement stairwell smelled of concrete and recycled air. It smelled of a space that had never been designed for comfort, only function. Christopher descended without touching the handrail. The fluorescent tube above the landing flickered at irregular intervals, casting the lower steps in a rhythm of light and near dark that would have unsettled most people. He noted it. He filed it. He kept moving. The server room door was heavy gray and unlabeled. It opened on a standard push bar mechanism. Christopher pressed it open with his forearm and stepped inside. The room was small. 8 server racks in 2 rows, floor to ceiling, each one humming at a frequency that pressed against the eardrums without quite becoming painful. The cooling fans ran beneath that hum, a deafening rhythmic drone that filled every cubic inch of air and made the room feel simultaneously mechanical and alive. The overhead bulbs were cheap and yellow dim against the blue indicator lights of the racks, and the combination gave the space a flat underwater quality. The temperature was dry and oppressive. There was no window. There was one door. He found the primary rack on the left. The mainframe port was exactly where Joshua had described it. Standard input, recessed panel, 3rd unit from the top. He unzipped his bag pocket. He removed the drive. He seated it in the port with a single clean motion and heard the quiet click of connection. A small indicator light on the drive shifted from dark to steady green. He checked his watch. It was 2:09 in the afternoon. He had 2 hours and 51 minutes before the auto wipe. He positioned himself with his back to the primary rack and faced the door. He did not need to wait long. The door opened at 2:14. Brandon came through first. He had changed since the parking lot. Fresh training gear, brighter, more deliberate, the kind of outfit worn for an audience rather than a workout. His chains were back. His phone was in his hand. Behind him came 3 men, and the last one through the door was carrying the heavy steel lifting bar at his side, its end dragging along the concrete floor with a low, grinding sound that was almost casual in its patience. The door swung shut. The hum of the cooling fans absorbed the impact. Brandon looked at Christopher. He smiled. "Thought you left," he said. He moved to the right, slow and deliberate, placing himself between Christopher and the door. The 3 men spread across the remaining width of the room. They did not speak. They did not need to. The geometry was the message. 4 of them, 1 exit, 1 man with his back to the server rack and nowhere to go. Christopher said nothing. His hands were open at his sides. His palms were visible, calloused and empty. His breathing was already at 4 counts. Brandon tilted his head. The smile stayed. He looked at the older man the way a person looks at something they are about to throw away, not with anger, but with the serene certainty of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply performing the final step. "You didn't leave," Brandon said. He took 1 step closer. "So I have to ask myself, why does a man in cheap sweatpants with no crew, no phone, no lawyer, no nothing, stay in a building after I tell him to get out?" He paused. He looked at his crew. He looked back. "And I can only come up with one answer. He's got nothing, no options, no backup, no plan." He spread his hands briefly, a gesture of false generosity. "Am I wrong?" Christopher looked at him. Flat. Steady. He said nothing. Brandon's smile tightened. He stepped forward and took the collar of Christopher's sweatshirt in his fist. He pulled it down and to the side, fully exposing the tattoo on the upper back and shoulder. The anchor, the trident, the jagged sunburst at its base, faint and precise, wrapping the design in a pattern that was not decorative. It was a designation. Brandon leaned in and looked at it the way a man looks at something he intends to mock publicly and at length. "Fake ink," he said. He looked at the camera on his crew member's phone, raised and filming. "Stolen valor. This guy comes in here, wears this like he earned it." He released the collar. He stepped back. His voice dropped to something lower and more deliberate. "I'm going to make sure everyone sees this." He nodded at the man with the bar. The man stepped forward. He raised the bar to shoulder height. Its weight was real, its surface cold and rusted, its balance the kind that allowed a single swing to do significant damage without significant effort. Christopher tracked it. He tracked the angle of the man's right elbow, the placement of his feet, the small forward lean that preceded the wind-up. His breathing did not change. His hands stayed open. His back remained against the rack. His left shoulder blade, 2 inches from the master override switch, recessed into the panel behind him. He had noted the switch at 2:09. He had not moved from this position since. The bar swung. Christopher stepped inside the arc. The blow caught him across the lower left ribs, glancing reduced in force by the shortened distance, but not without consequence. The impact was heavy and immediate. He felt the sharp compression along the rib cage, the breath forced partially out, the deep radiating ache that follows a strike to bone. He absorbed it without stepping forward. He did not fold. He did not reach for the wall. He exhaled on the 4 count fully and deliberately and brought his breathing back to baseline before the echo of the impact had finished moving through the server racks. Brandon watched. His expression shifted. Not concern. Something closer to surprise, the particular surprise of a man who expected a different kind of animal and is recalibrating. Again, he said, the system was entirely rigged against him. The hunters were about to learn they had cornered an apex predator. But how one unarmed man survives 4 attackers with steel in a locked soundproof room that answer had not yet arrived. The second swing caught him higher. It clipped the left shoulder, spinning him partially into the rack. His cheek met the metal edge of the server casing. The cut was small and immediate. He tasted blood. It was sharp and metallic, pooling at the back of his throat with a flatness that had no drama in it, only information. He was still standing. He noted that. He filed it. Brandon stood back and watched. He had stopped smiling. That was worse somehow than the smiling had been. The absence of performance meant something had shifted in him from cruelty as theater to cruelty as problem-solving. His crew held their positions. The man with the bar rolled his shoulder, readjusting his grip. The cooling fans ran beneath everything, relentless, indifferent, filling the room with their deafening drone. Christopher straightened, slowly. His left arm moved with controlled stiffness. His ribs registered each breath as a distinct, itemized event. He pressed his back to the rack and returned to stillness. His hands were open. His eyes were on Brandon. His breathing was 4 counts in, 4 counts out, and it cost him more now than it had before. Not everything. Not enough to matter. But more. He was cut off. That was the plain fact of it. The door was behind Brandon. The phone in his bag was a decoy. Its screen cracked in the first minutes of the confrontation, when one of the crew had kicked the bag against the wall. The crack ran corner to corner, a clean diagonal line, and the screen had gone dark on impact. He had no signal in the basement regardless. The walls were reinforced concrete. The server room sat below grade, and the only network access in the building ran through the mainframe currently humming at his back. He thought for the first time in 4 hours about what it meant to be precisely this isolated. Not afraid. He had been afraid before in places that made this basement feel like a well-lit room with comfortable furniture. But there was something in the specific quality of this isolation, the weight of the institution above him, a building full of people who had already been paid or frightened into compliance, that pressed against something older than fear. Something closer to the particular exhaustion of being made invisible by a system that had decided long before you arrived that your kind of quiet did not count. He let the thought exist for exactly 1 breath. Then he let it go. His eyes dropped briefly to his left wrist. The analog watch face was scratched as always. The hands read 4:43. 17 minutes to the auto wipe. The cooling fans cycled. The indicator lights on the racks blinked in their patient mechanical sequence. And there, on the inside of his wrist, just below the watch face, the micro USB drive's indicator light was visible through the gap in his sleeve where the fabric had ridden up during the impact against the rack. Green, steady, still transmitting. He did not look at it for more than a second. He dropped his sleeve back into place. He returned his eyes to Brandon's face. But something had shifted invisibly in the architecture of the room, not in the walls or the racks or the geometry of four men blocking one door. In him. A single variable, small and green and steady, had confirmed that the work he had done at 2:09 was still running. Whatever came through that door in the next 17 minutes, the payload was intact. Brandon crossed his arms. He studied Christopher with the flat, assessing look of a man who has run out of patience with something that will not perform on cue. "You're not going to beg," he said. It was not a question. Christopher said nothing. "That's actually impressive," Brandon said. His voice had no warmth in it. "Stupid, but impressive." He looked at the man with the bar and nodded toward Christopher's ribs. A second instruction. Specific. Christopher breathed in. 4 counts. He thought about the gym above him. 30 flat screens on a single hardwired line analog routing, every screen connected to the same physical input he had accessed at 2:09. He thought about Brandon standing in the parking lot at 1:47, describing that system with contempt, calling it archaic, advertising its architecture to no one he considered a threat. He thought about Joshua's voice in the supply closet, low and careful, giving him the exact deadline that had now become the only clock that mattered. He thought about what it meant that the auto-wipe, the tool Brandon had kept specifically to erase evidence, was 3 minutes away from wiping Brandon's own firewall instead. He had nothing left in this room. No backup, no phone, no crew, no weapon visible to anyone present. What he had was discipline. The kind built across years in environments where losing control was not an embarrassment but a cause of death. The kind that understood waiting not as passivity but as the most aggressive possible use of time. The kind that had spent 23 years learning the precise difference between the moment before and the moment of. His watch read 4:58, 2 minutes. The man with the bar stepped forward. Outside the heavy basement door in the corridor above the stairwell, a set of keys rattled. Light, metallic, unmistakable even through reinforced concrete. Joshua pacing nervous, not yet knowing what he would do with the drives if it came to that. Just present. Just there. Inside the room, Christopher absorbed the third strike. Shoulder again. He stayed upright. He tasted blood. He stayed upright. The indicator light beneath his sleeve stayed green. His watch read 4:59. He had nothing left but his discipline. That was about to be enough to burn an empire down. Whether he could trigger what he had built before the next swing landed, that answer was still 1 minute away. The door hit the wall at exactly 5 o'clock. Not opened, hit. The push-bar mechanism compressed and the heavy gray slab swung fully into the concrete wall behind it, with a sound that cut through the cooling fan drone like a pressure change. Coach stood in the frame, both hands on the push-bar. His face was the face of a man who had heard something through the ceiling above the stairwell and had moved on instinct before the reasoning caught up. He saw the bar first, then the crew, then Brandon. His mouth opened to speak. Then his eyes moved to Christopher, to the torn collar, to the fully exposed upper back and shoulder, and his mouth closed. He went still. Not the stillness of confusion, not hesitation. The stillness of recognition, specific and total, the kind that moves through a trained body before the conscious mind has finished processing what the eyes have sent it. Coach had served 8 years in the Marines. He had been out for 11. There were things the body did not forget, regardless of the distance from them. His eyes were fixed on the tattoo, the anchor, the trident, the jagged sunburst at the base, precise and faint, wrapping the design in a pattern that no civilian tattoo artist had ever produced and no stolen valor candidate had ever accurately replicated. It was not a decoration. It was a designation specific to a joint task force that had operated under a classification level Coach had only ever encountered once from a distance. In a briefing, he had not been cleared to attend in full. His face had gone the color of the concrete walls. "Drop it," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. He was looking at Brandon. He was not looking away from Christopher. "Drop the bar, right now." Brandon turned. His expression moved through irritation, then dismissal, then something that was not quite uncertainty but was adjacent to it. "Coach, this doesn't concern." "Drop it." Coach's voice had changed. The crack was gone. What replaced it was flat and absolute, the particular register of a man who was given an order in conditions where the alternative to compliance was catastrophic, and who has not forgotten what that register costs. "I will not say it again." The man with the bar looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at Coach. The silence in the room lasted 4 seconds. The cooling fans filled it. The bar lowered. The man set it on the floor. The concrete absorbed the sound. Brandon spread his hands. His smile returned reduced, now operating at lower confidence. He broke into the server room. "He's been in here messing with the—" "Who is he?" Coach said. He was still looking at Christopher. Brandon stopped. "Who is he?" Coach said again, quieter this time. The quieter version was more alarming than the loud one had been. Christopher turned. Not to Coach, not to Brandon. He turned to face the primary rack, and he reached back with his left hand, not rushed, not dramatic, simply purposeful, and pressed the master override switch recessed into the panel behind him. A single press. A clean, definitive click. The override was not an alarm. It was not a shutdown. It was the broadcast input toggle Joshua had described in the supply closet, the physical switch that redirected the mainframe's active output channel to the building's hardwired television system. Every flat screen in the gym above them changed inputs simultaneously. The sound arrived before any other confirmation. A deafening shriek of audio feedback, sharp and instantaneous, as 30 speakers on 30 screens switched sources at the same moment, and the audio calibration ran its half-second correction. The sound moved through the building's ventilation and the stairwell and the gaps in the door frame and reached the basement as a compressed, attenuated version of itself, still loud enough to hear clearly over the cooling fans. It lasted 2 seconds, then it resolved. What replaced it, rising faintly through the ceiling above them, was Brandon's own voice, recorded at 1:47 in the afternoon in the gym's parking lot, playing now on every screen in the building. Brandon's face changed. The smile went first. The color followed it. What remained was a specific, unguarded expression that had nothing of performance in it. The face of a man who has just understood fully and without room for reinterpretation the nature of the mistake he has been making for the past 6 hours. Coach looked at the ceiling. He looked at Christopher. He looked at the tattoo one more time. He stepped back from the door. He did not speak. He did not need to. His posture, straight-backed hands, lowered weight distributed, was not the posture of a gym owner managing a dispute. It was the posture of a man defaulting without deliberation to the deference his body had spent 8 years learning to assign to a specific tier of operator. Christopher was not shouting. He had not raised his voice once. He stood with his back to the rack and his face toward the room. His left ribs registered each breath. His shoulder registered each degree of movement. The cut on his cheek had dried. His hands were still open at his sides. His eyes moved to Brandon with the flat, patient quality of a man who has been waiting for this exact moment since 9:30 in the morning and finds the arrival of it neither satisfying nor surprising, simply correct. Brandon took 1 step backward. His crew had contracted, moving together without instruction, their earlier confidence replaced by something smaller and more animal. The diamond chains caught the yellow light. They looked different now, heavier, less like symbols of power and more like identifying marks. "What is this?" Brandon said. His voice had lost its architecture. It was a flat, diminished sound, not a question, a collapse. Christopher looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his watch. The green indicator light beneath his sleeve was no longer steady. It was blinking the confirmation pulse that indicated a completed upload rather than an active transmission. The payload was not transferring anymore. It had transferred. Past tense. Done. "The auto wipe ran at 5 about," Christopher said. His voice was even and unhurried. "It wiped your firewall, not my files." He paused. "Your routing numbers are on every screen upstairs. Your texts are up there. The audio of you bribing the staff is up there." He paused again. "The FBI received the upload 11 minutes ago." Brandon's physical power had meant nothing against a man who could dismantle a syndicate with a single keystroke. The only question now remaining was whether Brandon understood yet what he had lost, and the answer to that was already making its way down the stairwell in the form of footsteps. Multiple. Organized. Moving fast. The footsteps reached the basement corridor at 5:04. They were not the footsteps of gym members or trainers. They had a specific cadence, measured and purposeful, the kind produced by people who move in coordinated formation through unfamiliar spaces and have done it enough times that the coordination is no longer something they think about. 3 sets, then 2 more behind them, then the low exchange of clipped professional voices in the stairwell. Coach heard it first. He moved out of the doorway and pressed himself to the corridor wall without being asked. The first agent through the door wore a jacket with 4 letters across the back. She was followed by 2 others. They took in the room in a single practiced sweep. The bar on the floor, the crew against the wall, Brandon standing in the center with his hands at his sides in the particular stillness of a man who has run every calculation available to him and found that none of them resolve in his favor. She looked at Christopher. Christopher looked back. He said nothing. She nodded once, a small economical gesture that carried the weight of confirmation rather than greeting, and moved past him to the rack. Her colleague crossed the room to Brandon. Brandon looked at the agent. He looked at the jacket. His mouth moved once without producing sound. Then the training took over the instinct of a man who has operated at the edge of legal consequence long enough to have rehearsed this moment, and his expression reorganized itself into something composed and cooperative. He opened his hands. He took 1 step back. "I want to call my lawyer," he said. "You'll have that opportunity," the agent said. Her voice was professional and entirely without interest in his comfort. She reached for her cuffs. The diamond chain caught the light one final time. It swung once as his arms were brought behind him, a small pendulum motion, and then the agent's grip closed on his wrist and the chain snapped. Not the clasp, the chain itself at a link that had been under tension since he moved his arms backward, a thin and expensive thing subjected to a force it had not been designed to resist. It fell. The sound it made on the concrete floor was small and precise and final. A light, delicate clatter followed immediately by the heavy metallic clack of the cuffs locking into place. Brandon flinched at the sound of the cuffs. Not the chain. The cuffs. The crew did not resist. They were processed in order efficiently against the wall they had already retreated to. The man who had carried the bar looked at the floor throughout. The phones were bagged as evidence, the custom training gear, the embroidered initials, the carefully assembled presentation of status became inventory, itemized, labeled, assigned a case number. Upstairs on 30 flat screens, the footage was still running. Christopher could hear it through the ceiling, the ambient sound of Brandon's parking lot monologue cycling through the building's speaker system, his own voice describing his syndicate to his crew with the easy confidence of a man who considered himself untouchable. The gym floor above them had gone quiet in a way that large populated spaces go quiet when something has broken the social contract so completely that ordinary noise feels inappropriate. Sponsors who had arrived for the afternoon session stood near the weight racks with their phones out. Trainers had stopped moving. Members stood in clusters, watching the screens, watching the doors, watching each other. The second agent finished at the rack. She removed the micro USB drive from the mainframe port and placed it into an evidence bag with the same care she would have given to something fragile. She sealed it. She initialed the seal. She looked at Christopher. The upload included backup redundancy, she said. It was not a question. 3 separate channels, Christopher said. The primary went at 4:49. The redundancies completed before 5. He paused. The auto wipe ran at 5 and cleared his firewall architecture. The files were already outside his network before it ran. She nodded. She wrote something. She moved on. The door to the corridor opened again. Joshua stood in the frame. He was still in his pale green uniform. His mop was gone. In both hands, held with the careful deliberateness of someone transporting something they understand to be important, he held 2 physical hard drives. They were black standard issue, the kind used in the gym's backup recording system. His face was the face of a man who had made a decision in a supply closet that morning and had been living with the weight of it for 7 hours, waiting for the moment when the weight became something other than fear. He looked at the agent nearest the door. His voice was steady. "These are from the backup system," he said. "The one Brandon's IT guy didn't know about. The old owner installed it when he built the place. It runs on a separate line. Brandon never touched it because he didn't know it existed." He paused. "It recorded this morning, all of it." The agent took the drives. She looked at Joshua for a moment with an expression that was not warm, but was something more durable than warmth. She bagged the drives. She thanked him. He nodded and stepped back into the corridor and stood there very still. And after a moment, he put one hand against the wall as if he needed it, and his eyes were bright and wet, and he did not try to hide that. The gym fell into the quiet, specific order of a space being processed. Voices in the corridor, radio exchanges, the systematic sounds of documentation replacing the sounds of threat. Christopher looked at the concrete floor. He looked at the snapped chain lying in 2 pieces near the drain. He looked at the bar still where it had fallen. He reached into his gym bag. He removed a clean gray shirt, basic, unbranded, identical in quality to the one that had been ruined that morning. He pulled it on. He picked up his bag. He walked past Brandon, past the agents, past the evidence markers beginning to dot the floor in a neat evidentiary constellation. He walked up the stairwell and out through the main floor without stopping. The screens were still running. Nobody spoke to him. A spilled protein shake, long dried, marked the floor near the locker room entrance in a faint sticky outline. He left it there along with a ruined champion and walked out into the late afternoon without looking back.
Fiction. But that feeling of being completely underestimated by an arrogant bully who thinks money makes them untouchable. I know my patience has been tested by people who thought loudness equaled power. When was the last time you stayed perfectly calm and let someone dig their own grave with their arrogance? Drop a comment, like, share, subscribe.